Howdy, all you delicious people. You're the worst. I'm the worst. Everyone's the worst. At the end of the day, it's time to review a show called You're the Worst. So let's go into here and let's ultimately just kind of, in a very first way, go out of our way to ultimately talk about the show in a cryptic like sense. For the first 5 episodes, and then we'll get into spoilers about every single one of these episodes. So when looking at it, we ultimately have Aya Cash, who ultimately immediately I'm like, why does this girl look so familiar? And then immediately in there to just be like, oh, this is Stormfront from The Boys. I didn't realize this. And ultimately, when I was scrolling through IMDb, um, shortly after watching this, because she looked so familiar, because ultimately I needed to look someone else up anyways. I was like, oh yeah, she is from The Boys, because recently I also had to look up another. I had to look up another actress as well. Ultimately, I had to go and look up Janet Varney, which ultimately I also know her uh, from Stand Against Evil or Stand versus Evil. I always get those titles confused. Uh, and ultimately, it's on Hulu, so you can go and check that out. That show is freaking hilarious too. But anyways, seemingly the real approach of this show is it seems that everyone is getting their time in the sun. Like the way they kind of have every single character set up is really the most interesting thing that you can do. Is you're kind of like going like, okay, well, Jimmy and Gretchen are getting their time, okay, sure. But then eventually we're going to start adding people and adding people and adding people, and those people that get added are going to get their time, but we're going to go back to Jimmy and Gretchen consistently. Uh, I thought that this show was rather like it's simple but effective. The comedy that's delivered is like to a point where maybe not everyone is going to find it funny, but ultimately when I watched this, I thought it was funny. I thought some of the stuff that was going on in these shows were kind of very common ground, but also when looking at it, there's several times where ultimately you would probably heckle someone for being this kind of person, or ultimately you would be in the same kind of ground as so and so person. And so, reasonably, this show might have the ability to be for everybody, or ultimately, there are some episodes where it's a bit obscure, where it's like, why would this person go out of their way to do this? Like, why would this person go out of their way to go this far? But by and large, also, this show tends to deal with like seemingly drugs of some kind, to the point of people taking drugs and stuff like that. But ultimately, I thought that this show was ultimately again simple and effective. I thought recently that going through this, I thought that reasonably when we have the relationship between Jimmy and Gretchen is kind of the anchor, and once we get to, because we're going to keep going to that anchor, we're going to keep putting that anchor back into the water, and everybody else is just kind of just there to eventually have their importance in this ship, which is a show. But I think at some points it is the problem could be that it is common. The problem is it's like, well, you know what? If I just wanted to watch life, I could ultimately just live it, and so ultimately that could be again a problem for people. But ultimately, I'm like, man, like so the show doesn't exactly go anywhere, or the show doesn't um, exactly seem like, oh my god, this is the most original thing that I've ever seen in my life. But when looking at it, I just thought it was fun anyways. So at the end of the day, let's ultimately go into spoilers about this show. Let's crack out the double five to otherwise go into reviewing and talking about the show called You're the Worst. So, spoiler time. It's probably about the time that normally we would go into spoiling, but ultimately I'm just stalling for some strange reason because ultimately I need to get my hand into the frame and ultimately blowing it where I normally do that, of course. So, spoilers! Ultimately, we have it to where Jimmy and Gretchen seemingly seem to be meeting at some wedding of sorts. Seemingly between Vernon Barbara and Becca Barbara. Becca Barbara? Her name is Double B. Her name is BB! Anyways, she's a BB gun. But anyways, we have it to where seemingly Jimmy and Gretchen ultimately seem to get together at this wedding, and it seems that eventually while they are talking that ultimately uh, it seems quite easily and quickly that they are going to land themselves into the bedroom. You ultimately have it to where bizarrely we have it to where Jimmy is ultimately going downtown on Gretchen, and we have it to where eventually Jimmy spits on Gretchen, and we have it where Gretchen is ultimately saying, "Did you seriously just spit on me?" And Jamie's like, "Well, yeah." And Gretchen's like, "Nah, whatever." So we have it to where eventually we have it to where Gretchen is going to take a shower. We ultimately have Jimmy who is sitting down on the toilet, and we have it to where Gretchen is talking to Jimmy while he's on the toilet. Eventually, Gretchen gets out of the shower, and Jimmy ends up getting up and walking off. And Gretchen is like, "Did you miss a move there?" And ultimately, Jimmy says, "Like, well, I had peed." And Gretchen's like, "Why did you pee sitting down?" And Jimmy's like, "Well, like, I like peeing sitting down. Like, it's my bathroom. It's whatever I want to do." So, like, we have these, like, obscurity moments here, but anything moving on. So, we eventually have it to where Jimmy is seemingly heading and hanging out with Edgar. And ultimately, Gretchen is kind of just treating Jimmy as if he is kind of like, well, like he's nice, but ultimately I can keep shopping around, if you know what I mean. So eventually we have it to where Gretchen uh, is to meet a guy I believe named Ty, and so ultimately we have it to where Gretchen is ultimately again leading into the bedroom business with this guy named Ty, and ultimately she is going downtown Georgia Brown on this guy, really just uh, vacuuming away, let's just say, sucking away, and ultimately we have it to where this guy is absurdly saying all kinds of absurd things that you could ever hear a man say out of his mouth. Oh my god, it's freaking hilarious. This is the best scene out of the show. So, we ultimately have Gretchen who is sucking away, and we have it where this guy is saying, "Oh, delicious, amazing, wonderful," and all this kind of absurd nonsense, to where Gretchen ultimately spits on on this guy's member, and we have it to where ultimately uh, we have it to where the guy complains about, "Did you seriously just spit on me?" And she's like, "Yeah," and he's like, okay. So ultimately we have it to where Gretchen, after hearing this guy saying, "Oh, delicious," and all these absurd like things that made no rational sense in my brain noggin. We have it to where ultimately Gretchen is like, Could I have some drugs? Could I have some cocaine? I want to take some cocaine. Um, so ultimately, the guy says, "Yeah, the cocaine is somewhere," and so we have to where Gretchen is in the bath, just ultimately just taking these drugs, and so reasonably we move on. So we ultimately have it to where Gretchen is to meet Lindsay, I believe. And Lindsay ultimately is seemingly a girl that wants to try to lose weight. It seems like she's going and counting calories and all this stuff. It seems like she is doing like any kinds of things to ultimately lose weight, even to the point of I believe like locking down her teeth or like locking down her jaw so that way, ultimately, she would just have milkshakes of sorts, and that's all she could have. So we have it to where Gretchen is talking to Lindsay, ultimately, to talk about losing weight and stuff like that. And we eventually have all of Jimmy, Gretchen, Edgar, and Lindsay all go to this get together where it's some sort of Sunday fun day, and they all go to this like family esh like get together, and Lindsay eventually sees Paul, who is ultimately her husband, and Paul ultimately has a baby in his hands, and ultimately we have some person that's ultimately saying like, "Hey, look at him! Like, I bet he's gonna be a great father," and Lindsay's just like, yeah, I'm not ready for that. And ultimately, I'm not ready for that with Paul. Um, so, anyways, so we get on to here and we ultimately have it to where Lindsay is ultimately talking to Edgar at some point before the Sunday Fun Day. And we find out that Edgar is a veteran of the military. And interestingly enough, we have it to where Edgar is talking to seemingly some guys that are otherwise going to try to learn how to be a veteran for a movie or a show or something. And we have it to where ultimately these guys are otherwise learning from Edgar. And eventually we see one of the guys, one of the actors, ultimately go and do this movie where like he talks about like his pride and everything like that and how he should be treated, this military ash like guy, and then ultimately we have it to where this guy cracks out a machine gun and just starts just annihilating everybody in this movie, and it's like what the f. So we have it to where Edgar is eventually going and talking to Lindsay. And eventually we have Edgar, who is ultimately mentioning to Lindsay that ultimately he kind of hates how people think that he should feel and stuff like that, and like he ultimately doesn't want any like handouts or whatever that anyone is gonna give to him. But then eventually, when they go and eat, and ultimately the girl who is ultimately the waitress is ultimately saying like, "Well, hey, we can give you the military discount," and ultimately Edgar is like, "No, I don't want the military discount." And then ultimately the waitress starts walking away, and then Edgar is like, "Hey, give me the military discount." So she walks off. We ultimately have it to where Lindsay's ultimately having her milkshake drink because that's all she can drink. Ultimately, we have it to where it seems that Lindsay is ultimately having him try, Edgar try the thing that she is eating. And so we seemingly have it to where Lindsay is dipping her fries into this milkshake and then she's eating it, even though her jaw is uh, technically quasi wired shut at some point. Like I want to say it's either that her jaw is wired shut or ultimately like it seems like she's having braces, but because ultimately it doesn't look exactly like wired shut. Because I've seen people where their mouth is completely wired shut, and so ultimately it just kind of looked weird via seeing that. But anyways, so we have it to where we have Sunday Funday. So reasonably within these reasonably within this episode, we ultimately have it to where oh, God, I keep having to pull back from Sunday Funday, because that's like the last thing that I need to talk about. You ultimately have it to where Jimmy is ultimately talking to Gretchen, and it seems like there is always a third person in between them. To ultimately, Jimmy and Gretchen are consistently arguing about their relationship, even though in all actuality it seems that Gretchen is consistently going back to Jimmy because she she finds him to be like a much more reasonable person and everything like that, and there's no complaints in the bedroom, if you know what I mean. So, but we have them consistently arguing about the relationship, and we have it to a reasonably. We have Ty, who otherwise keeps continually mixing himself into. Ultimately, have Gretchen like, "Hey, I want to see you again soon." While they're at this get together, and we have it to where Jimmy is hopping mad just because of this whole situation. So we have it to where we have it to where now Sunday Funday. Unless I keep coming back to something, at least, unless there's something that I need to get back into, but we'll get there. So we ultimately have it to where seemingly there is some kind of bucket list of some activity to go into. It seems that Sunday Funday is ultimately to be let's get all of everything out of this weekend, uh, because ultimately Monday is always the worst day. And we have it to where seemingly two people out of the four people ultimately don't actually work on Monday, so it's reasonably just like, okay, what do they have to complain about? But so we have it to where Edgar is planning this bizarrish Sunday Funday, and it seems that ultimately all four of these people are doing these absurd activities that make no sense, and they're going about this, and we have it to where ultimately there seems to be a guy that is otherwise repetitiously going and following them through every single one of these events. We ultimately have it to where seemingly there is a guy that is just consistently going through and hipster ringleader, evidently, is what he's called. Ultimately, the guy that I know from Silicon Valley, Thomas Middleditch? Interesting name. So, we ultimately have the hipster ultimately going and speaking to Edgar at first to ultimately kind of say, "Oh, hey man, you dropped your list," and ultimately, "Hey man, do you like my sunglasses? It's from the movie Drive." I'm like, I'm sorry, I've seen the movie Drive, and there are no sunglasses that look anything like that in that movie. So this is some guy that is otherwise pawning off some sunglasses or something as a high value thing, but it's not. Uh, if you would have said the sunglasses from the movie Hancock or something like that, then maybe I would have been like, oh, okay, but no. Uh, so we have it to where this ringleader of sorts is ultimately going and following these people for everywhere they go. So reasonably we have it to where bizarrely these people are going to some person's open house, and ultimately we have it to where the ringleader and his group of people are all going there, and because ultimately there are free cookies. And we have it to where Edgar sees these people repetitiously following them, even to a record store, and ultimately he intercepts them as like, dude, there's no way that you would ultimately want to go to these exact same places. I've never seen you go to these places before until now. Like, you stole my list. You stole my story, kind of thing. And we have it to where ultimately this ringleader is ultimately just like, no, man, like, I just love coming here. Like, how could you say that I'm trying to like barge in on your day? What are you talking about? But every single time we immediately consistently keep seeing these people, to ultimately I'm assuming that eventually these people are just going to be part of this show, to where they just keep following these guys around. Immediately, it seems like the friends and ultimately these ringleaders of sorts start to commingle with one another, and we have one girl who's ultimately wearing like a kitten shirt, and she seemed rather bizarre, as if she gets high, probably a lot. So reasonably, we have it to where like that is really just the real episodes that I've seen so far. Um, a lot of this stuff I really didn't like. I didn't go through every little bit of detail and lines and stuff like that. There's some real there's some really interesting things here, and I really did enjoy the show. And so reasonably, I thought that the show was really fun. When eventually we're going to see, um, or when I'm going to be able to see more of the show, like I didn't realize how, I didn't realize how long this review was going to be and how short I was going to make all of it. I didn't realize how short it was gonna be. Like I thought of like, yeah, I have like 30 minutes of talking time. But then when looking at it, I'm like, because ultimately I have like 2 to 3 other things to review. One of them was also an entire show, an entire season of a show, and one is also a movie. And so, reasonably, I guess that's the reason why this is a little bit of a shorter review. But anyways, so ultimately, when looking at it, yeah, Gretchen ultimately seemingly kind of mixing it up with Jimmy, and ultimately it seems that uh, we have a tour. We have Jimmy and Gretchen who are eventually going to go to their friends or their best friends to ultimately talk about the relationship to see if they're going to confirm things or not, and eventually when other third party people end up getting to the ring of things or the rung of things, we ultimately have to seemingly have it to where Jimmy is ultimately seemingly uncomfortable with Becca, and like I thought that those were kind of interesting moments there. But other than that, I got nothing. But anyways, I really enjoyed this show. If anything, I am going to, I guess, just get out of here. So goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.